Today on Different Perspectives, Zambia's political drama takes yet another twist. Hello, I am Paul Ndiho. Just as former President Edgar Lungu was about to be buried in a private ceremony in South Africa, a court order brought everything to a halt. The tug of war between his family and the Zambian government has turned what should have been a solemn moment into a full-blown constitutional and political showdown. To learn more, I spoke to Dr. Sombo Muzata, Assistant Professor of Political Science at James Madison University and Research Associate at University of Pretoria, currently in South Africa. She breaks it all down, what led to the burial being blocked, and what this very public spectacle means for Zambians at home and abroad. Welcome to Different Perspectives.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
So, you happen to be in a place where the former president of Zambia, President Edgar Lungu, you're originally from Zambia. Have you been able to talk to people who know the late president and the circumstances leading to why he's being buried in South Africa?
To convey my condolences to the family of our former president, specifically to his wife, Mrs. Esther Lungu, and to the rest of the family, the children, and other extended family members. Sad that he's not being buried today. Today is June 25th, and burial was supposed to take place in the morning here in South Africa, I understand in Johannesburg. And the burial has not taken place because Zambia's Attorney General, I think, took the case to court. And I think what they're contending is they want to repatriate the remains of our former president back to Zambia so that he can be honored and given a state funeral in the country. For the last 3+ weeks, there's been this back and forth, a standoff, so to say, between the government and the former president's family. So we're really going through a very tough time as citizens of Zambia. And also other people who are observing this situation, I think, are equally concerned and sad. Yeah.
What are the circumstances that led to the former president ending up in South Africa and maybe possibly being buried in South Africa?
Yeah, I think he was seeking a medical treatment here, and it wasn't the first time that he had come to South Africa to seek medical treatment. He'd be coming on a routine basis through the time he was president, and after he became president, I understand that it became hard for him to come and seek medical services here. So sadly, he lost his life after an operation. And we're really at a place where there's a standoff. There was at some point an understanding that the government, the current government, and his family had reached an agreement on how we were going to proceed. But things fell off, and we are where we are at, and it's very sad.
I've been following the story very closely, and I remember the government had agreed to give the late president a state funeral. But somehow the family came back and said they were not interested, and therefore they were going to conduct a private funeral in South Africa. What's behind that story?
Yes, so I think the current situation that we are in exposes the lackings in the constitution of Zambia, and there are quite a lot of shortcomings, specifically regarding how to handle funerals of high level and high profile individuals like president or former president. From my history lessons when I was a kid, I learned how funerals for traditional leaders have to be handled, starting with the announcement. Who makes the announcement? At what time should the announcement be made after the passing of a leader, in this case, a former president? Who is supposed to carry that message? And but we know that there was a very serious problem between our former president and our current president, and all that fed into all of this on one hand. But on the other hand, Our constitution does not give that prescription. We do not have a legal framework that specifically stipulates what is supposed to happen. So it's not the first time we're seeing this. When our first founding president, Kenneth Kaunda, passed away, his wish was that he wanted to be buried next to his wife, Mama Betty. And that case was also taken to court, I believe, and eventually he ended up being buried in Embassy Park, where Zambian presidents are buried. And they're buried there traditionally. I am yet to see a provision in the Zambian constitution that specifically states that a head of state is supposed to be buried at Embassy Park. I might be totally ignorant. And, I'm not a legal professional. I'm not a lawyer. So I might err on that. I might have missed the constitutional provision. But from my understanding, it's a tradition that we have established.
And I've been to Embassy Park myself. All the other later presidents are buried there. So why is it a problem for the family not to allow the government to do that?
Yeah, given the circumstances and the lack of a constitutional provision, we've gotten to a point where the Attorney General is saying that in the public interest, the former president has to be buried in Embassy Park. Then the question becomes, what is public interest? Okay, so, and I don't have an answer for that in this particular circumstances, because public interest is supposed to be a consideration of the well-being of the public. Okay, and it's defined differently depending on the circumstances and context. So in this particular instance, is it for the well-being of ordinary Zambians that the former president is buried in Zambia? Should that be what we follow, or should we follow what his family's desires are? From my own reading of this case, there's a lot of layers that need to be peeled, and it is very complicated. So I might give a wrong direction if I say, why not allow the family to bury where they want to bury? But I can assure you that there's no specific constitution or constitutional provision on where the president has to be buried, if he has to be buried in Zambia, or if he has to be buried in South Africa or anywhere else in the world.
I've been reading through what's going in. I understand some of the nuances behind what we are seeing. When you become a president, you cease to become you become a public official. You cease to become that father, that brother, that uncle, that grandfather, but you become a statesman, right? Now, granted that the two leaders, the ex-president and the current president, have had outstanding issues, that one cannot be taken away. We agree that both men have had it for themselves, The current president, while he was in opposition, went through a lot under the later president. You could argue that both men never recovered from those, those issues, outstanding issues that they had in the past. But let bygones be bygones. Why can't the family allow for the former head of state to be buried at the Embassy Park, where all these other people are being buried?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's a very excellent analysis for which most of us, have been grappling with over the last few weeks. But I'm not the family spokesperson, so I cannot expressly say that the family should let him to be buried at Embassy Park if they do not want it to be that way. So this is really a complex issue, and I think what we should pick going forward is, can we make ourselves to be ready and prepared when similar circumstances occur? What should we be doing? And I'll tell you, our neighbors over in Tanzania, they have an actual provision, the National Funerals Act of 2006, I think, which gives guidelines on what has to happen. We don't have that. So in the absence of that, the fight that is there, the legal fight, is the public interest. And I think that's the argument that the Zambian government is going to put forward. So we'll see how this unfolds. The courts have to decide how this unfolds. And I hope that we soon get to a point where we can let the remains of our former president to rest, because this is really sad.
How about critics who say that some of the family members are just not being fair here? They're depriving the citizens of Zambia from, sending off their former president, because it's not about family here. It's about a national treasure. President Edgar Lungu was a head of state and therefore a national treasure, and should be treated as such and given all the necessary uh, uh, let's say state funeral that is accorded to any other person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that argument is very strong, and I think it's an argument that you see clearly when you browse through various social media platforms in Zambia. People are saying that they need to bring his remains back home, and he needs to be honored for military honors, and lie in state and all that. But I think the family has their own reasons. So should we respect the family's reasons, or should we respect the fact that he is a public asset, so to say, having been president? But if that's the argument that we're putting forth, what constitutional backing do we have that states that he needs to be put to rest where the government wishes for him to be put to rest?
I mean,
so
I agree. I agree with your assessment, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that obviously the family. I don't know whether the family should take precedent here, or if the government should come in and use its muscle and say, regardless of what the family thinks, because it's very rare that a head of state dies and the family takes over. Even here, we've had presidents who have died. Yes, they'll request for a private funeral, but the state, it doesn't matter who is in power. If it's a former head of state, they are given all that due respect, with everything that comes with honoring a past leader, right? So I think Zambia, the government is willing to do that. At least if I'm correct, I've been looking at some of the things that the government has said. I don't remember seeing anything where the government has said, at no point should this person be given a state funeral or accorded everything that any other past president has had. I've not seen that. What I've seen, though, is the family pushing back and forth, saying that, no, we can't do this. Should the Zambians allow the family to take precedent over the government's wishes?
And off of this, there's a huge job for the Zambian parliament. They each have to sit down and come up with a law in which we have to deal with these cases. Because we had this case with former President Kenneth Kaunda, and he was the founding father. Okay? So, and we're having sort of a repeat of this happening. And it's not only Zambia that has had an issue with repatriating remains of a former president. We had this issue in Angola. I think they've had this issue in Congo DRC, Tshisekedi's father, and other, high-profile individuals. So it's sort of really complex, but it stops us in our tracks to think, what should we do? And I hope that the solution in this particular case is going to come up very soon. And it would be good, in my own personal opinion, if the remains were repatriated to Zambia, and if it were to be a private funeral, it would equally be good. But is the government ready to have a private funeral done? That's the question.
How about people who say, for example, that you are in South Africa right now? I'm sure you've talked to a lot of people on the ground. What are their thoughts about this whole issue?
It depends on who you're talking to, Paul. So this issue is highly polarizing. If you're talking to people that are sympathetic with the patriotic front, they'll tell you that we should go ahead and bury in South Africa. Matter of fact, the other day on Monday, I was at the airport, welcoming some visitors who are here to see me. And I saw a whole delegation of Zambian politicians and ordinary citizens, some of them clad in regalia, identifying the former president who's passed away, and they're here for the funeral. So if I talk to people in that camp, they would like the funeral to happen here in South Africa so they can move on and get closure. Okay. But if I talk to people who are in the opposition United Party for National Development, they'll say that this is a state funeral. Let's have a state funeral. Let the remains be brought to Zambia and let the former president be buried in Zambia. So it's a very hard situation. So depending on who you're talking to, they'll tell you what they think is the solution.
Interesting. One of the things that I've picked up is the fact that the family doesn't want the current president anywhere near the body of the later president. How is that playing out?
Part of me is like, are we really playing into our emotions and our superstitions as people? What really is going on here? I've been failing to understand that part. And if the body of the former president is there, if the person who used to guard him when he was living is there, and the medical person is also there, if there's some sort of and still harm the person who has died, I think having other people around would be enough comfort that this person who has passed on will still be protected. Honestly, I've failed to understand. I've totally failed to understand. I might be out of touch, and which would really be sad. But I just feel like, this case is exposing Zambians at a much deeper level. It's exposing the constitutional shortcomings. It's bringing to light, people's thoughts and people's superstitions, and perhaps people's being far away, removed from their faith. I don't know. Zambia is a Christian nation. What does the Bible say about things like this?
You bring up a good point. I was actually about to ask you something along those lines. Every time I've gone to Zambia, people are very, very prayerful, in a sense that they show up to church. In most places, people don't show up to church. But in Zambia, on a Sunday, that's when you know that people actually love God. Oh, they go to church. They show up in droves. Mm-hmm. So what's this whole thing about not respecting the wishes of the former president, or allowing the body to come back to the country? The government clearly has said that his returns, his body can be brought back to Zambia. And I think at some point they were even willing to meet the cost of doing that. But again, the family has kind of like come in and, tried to play politics. Should people be playing politics at a critical time like this?
Sadly, we're seeing them doing that.
Is it about politics?
That's what is going on. Honestly, I'm going to tell you, I've been so confused. I'm like, is this politics? Is this African tradition at play? Is this just underdevelopment or being primitive? Is this superstition? You can come up with all sorts of terminologies, and I wouldn't want to use all of those, because I'll be very honest with you. I hold the former president in high esteem. I know that he was a human being, and it's treating a person as a human being. Okay, and forgetting about, at this particular moment, we can suspend the thought that certain things probably didn't go well in the country, and that's how we saw the results of the elections. But if we suspend that thought and we just become human beings, I think even in death he deserves dignity, and he deserves better. And for me, that's what has been hurting me: the fact that on one hand he cannot be accorded the honors that are deserving of a person of his stature. On the other hand, the family's wishes cannot be respected. That's a tough place to be in.
There are people who have said, for example, that the current president has privately and publicly said that, whatever happened, happened, and let bygones be bygones. He has moved on. That's why he's allowed his government to accord him a state funeral. But again, going back to the family has chosen otherwise. So how do we get out of this kind of a scenario?
This is about a human being who tried as much as possible to lead the country in the way that he knew best. This is about a person who was famous and popular and was liked by a large number of people. We need to accept that. That is a fact. And this is about according a person a send off that they deserve. Okay. So, assuming that the court here in South Africa ruled that the former president should be buried here, I think it's important that Zambians respect that. Okay. And if the court rule that he shouldn't be buried here and he should be repatriated to Zambia, I pray and hope that the family will also be in a position where they can accept that, and together with the government, they can work out a solution on how this can be done.
So you talked about how you held the late president in the highest esteem. What made him a tick for you?
Say that, notwithstanding the fact that a lot of other things did happen. If I talk to people, because I left Zambia just about the time that President Lungu was coming to power. But I've gone back home several times and I have seen physically, you see physically things that happen. That's how we measure development, unfortunately. Okay. So if I go and I drive on a good road in a particular direction, if I go and I see, things that weren't there the last time I was there, and I can clearly pinpoint that these were done at the time that a person was in power, I think they deserve some credit for that. We should not forget that when leaders come to power and they're leading our countries, they're doing it on an incremental basis. It's small changes, and those changes need to be recognized. Okay, so it's from that perspective. I mean, we can see a lot of good and we can also see a lot of bad. But is this the time for us to be unearthing all the bad that happened? Can we for a moment just stop and recognize a human being for being a human being? No one is perfect. Okay, so perhaps we need to take this, use our heads, but let our hearts also lead as we think about this matter.
How should the late president be remembered, or what legacy does he leave behind?
He should be remembered as a leader who tried as best as he could, given the level of exposure that he's had, the resources that he had, and the people that surrounded him. Because when you lead at that level, you don't lead alone. You lead with others. So we need to take that into consideration. It's sad that this impasse now goes into being part of his legacy. But then also, this might be the point at which we move forward and actually have a specific law put in place, a constitutional provision. I hope that the Zambian parliament will be reading the Tanzanian provisions that they have in the National Funerals Act, and basically just ask to learn and then come up with something that would be workable for Zambia. So part of his legacy will, I hope, most likely be that he was the person that got us as Zambians to think about this end and what happens after that.
Sambo, We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank
We want to know what you think about former President Edgar Lungu's legacy. Share your comments in the comment section below. And of course, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to Paul Ndiho on X, Instagram, Threads, Facebook, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and YouTube.